My name is Vivian Hale. I'm 31 years old. And on the day I was supposed to look like the happiest woman in the room, my own father raised a champagne glass in front of 200 wedding guests, looked past me toward my younger sister Brielle, and said into a wireless microphone connected to every speaker in the ballroom, "To my real daughter, and to the mistake we still feed." The room laughed. Not the polite, confused laugh of people who don't know what to do with a bad joke. A loud, comfortable laugh. The laugh of people who had clearly heard him talk about me this way before. My sister Brielle laughed the loudest. She was already filming. Phone tilted at that practiced 4-5 degree angle she used for Instagram stories. The one that flattered her jawline and made the chandelier behind her glow like a halo. She added a caption I didn't see until the next morning. 3 crying, laughing emojis and the words Dad said what we were all thinking. I'm a hospital revenue cycle director. I run a department that recovers $40 million a year in incorrectly billed claims for a network of regional hospitals. My job, every single day, is to read paper that other people wish nobody would read. So when my father lifted his glass and called me a mistake in front of my new in-laws, my coworkers, my college roommate, and my husband Theo's grandmother, I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't lift my own glass. I looked across the room at Marlena, my wedding planner, the woman I had hired and paid for personally, and I gave her one slow, deliberate nod. She nodded back. That was all. 2 hours later, security walked my father, my mother, and my sister Brielle out of that ballroom in front of every guest who had laughed at his toast. And when my father saw the invoice waiting for him at the front desk, the color drained out of his face so fast my mother had to grab his elbow. Before I tell you what was on that invoice. Who what? My husband whispered to me when the music stopped. And why my mother is still leaving voicemails 6 months later, begging me to be reasonable. Tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching this from? I'm genuinely curious how far a story like this is going to travel tonight. The thing nobody tells you about being called a mistake at your own wedding is that the worst part isn't the sentence. The worst part is realizing the room laughed because the sentence wasn't new to them. It was new to me. Or rather, new to me in public. I had heard versions of it my entire life. But always behind a closed door. Always followed by, "Your father was just stressed." Viv. Don't make it bigger than it is. I am the older sister. I was the planned one. Brielle is younger by 4 years. And somewhere between her birth and my 8th birthday, my parents quietly decided that one of us was the prize and one of us was the project. My mother started referring to me as our practice run at family dinners by the time I was 12. Always laughing while she said it. My father started calling me the expensive one when the orthodontist bills came in. Even though Brielle ended up needing 3 rounds of braces and I needed 1. I was the one who paid for half my own college. I was the one who covered my mother's emergency root canal in 2019 because their insurance had lapsed. 4美元. 200 on my credit card. Never repaid. I was the one who quietly co-signed on Brielle's first apartment when she was 23 because, as my mother put it, she's still finding herself, and you're the stable one. Stable. That was the word they used the way other families used. Loved. Stable meant useful. Stable meant available. Stable meant the one who would not complain when the family vacation photos somehow always ended up being just the 3 of them, with me cropped to the edge or behind the camera. I met Theo Vance 4 years ago at a hospital compliance conference in Charlotte. He's a healthcare attorney. The kind of quiet, observant man who notices what people do, not what they say. the first time he met my parents. Over dinner at a steakhouse, my father insisted on, but expected me to pay for. My father introduced Brielle as our beautiful daughter and introduced me as Vivian, who works in billing. Theo set down his fork halfway through that dinner and asked my father a single question. Sir, what does your older daughter actually do? My father blinked at him, irritated, and said, something with hospitals. Theo turned to me, smiled, and said, loud enough for the table to hear. She runs a $40 million recovery operation across 6 hospitals. I read about it in a trade journal last month. My father's face did this small, ugly twitch. Brielle changed the subject. My mother kicked me under the table for embarrassing your father. That night in the hotel, Theo held my hand and said, your family talks about you like you're a problem they tolerated. You know that's not normal. Right? I started crying, which surprised me, because I hadn't cried about my parents in probably 10 years. Some part of me had needed someone outside the family to confirm that the water was, in fact, on fire. Theo proposed 8 months later. We planned the wedding for 18 months. I paid for almost all of it myself, with Theo's family contributing a generous gift toward the venue. My parents contributed nothing. My father said at one point, we're saving for Brielle's wedding because she'll need more help. She wasn't engaged. She wasn't dating anyone seriously. But the money I might have asked for was already earmarked for a wedding that didn't exist. For a daughter who, in their language, mattered more. I let it go because I had stopped expecting anything. Theo and I built the wedding the way I built spreadsheets at work. Carefully. Every line item documented. Every vendor under written contract. And every contract under my name. Marlena Cruz was the wedding planner I hired. A woman in her late 40s who had run high-end weddings in 3 states and had a reputation for handling difficult families with surgical calm. The first time I sat down with Marlena, 6 months before the wedding, she asked me a question no other vendor had asked. Is there anyone in your family who has historically tried to make events about themselves? I almost laughed. I told her about my father. I told her about the toast he had given at my cousin's wedding 3 years earlier, where he had spent 4 full minutes talking about his own business accomplishments and then said about the bride. And of course we wish her well. I told her about the time at my graduate school graduation dinner when he had stood up uninvited at the restaurant and announced that Brielle had just been accepted to a community college program, redirecting the entire evening. I told her about the Thanksgiving when he had introduced me to a new neighbor as the one who didn't quite turn out the way we hoped. But she pays her own bills. So, Marlena listened without writing anything down. Then she said, Vivian, I want to be very clear with you about something. At your wedding, you are my client, not your father, not your mother, not your sister. If anyone behaves in a way that threatens the experience you are paying me to deliver, I have protocols. I just need to know in advance whether you want me to use them or to suppress them. I sat across from her in that small office and felt something shift in my chest. For my entire life, every adult around me had asked me to suppress. I looked at Marlena and said, use them. She nodded once and pulled out a contract addendum. It was 3 pages. It listed specific behaviors that would trigger specific responses. Disruption of toasts, unauthorized speeches, verbal attacks on the bride, recording without consent, public humiliation. Each behavior had a tier. Tier 1 was a quiet word from a planner. Tier 2 was a removal from the immediate area. Tier 3 was full security escort off the property. Tier 3 also included a clause that I almost laughed at when I first read it. because I had never imagined I would actually use it. The clause stated that any guest removed under Tier 3 would be presented with an itemized invoice for any disruption-related costs, vendor fees, and an enforcement fee, payable to the contracted security firm. I asked Marlena why that clause existed. She said, "Because some people only understand consequences when they come with a number." I signed the addendum. I paid the additional fee for a 2-person uniformed security detail on the day of the wedding. I told no one, not Theo, because he had already met my family, and I didn't want him spending the 18 months before our wedding bracing for a fight. Not my mother, because she would have warned my father. Not my best friend Janice, because Janice would have told me I was being paranoid. The week of the wedding, my mother called me 4 times to ask whether the seating chart could be adjusted so that my father could give a small father of the bride toast. I told her no. I told her my husband's father was giving the toast for our side, and my college mentor, Dr. Aaron Lyles, was giving a toast as a family friend. And that was the program. My mother sighed in that long, performed way she had, and said, "Vivian, your father will be so hurt after everything we've done." I said, "Mom, the program is set." She said, "He's going to say something anyway. You know how he is." I said, "I do know how he is. That's why the program is set." She hung up on me. Looking back, that phone call was a warning I should have taken more seriously. But I had already planned for it. I just didn't realize how publicly he would prove me right. The wedding was on a Saturday in late September, at a restored historic estate about an hour outside Asheville. The leaves had just started to turn. The ceremony was outdoors, on a stone terrace overlooking a valley, and the reception was inside a ballroom with 20-foot ceilings and chandeliers older than my grandmother. I walked down the aisle alone. My father had asked, 2 months earlier, to walk me down. I had told him, gently, that I was walking alone because I wanted to. He had not spoken to me for 3 weeks after that. He showed up to the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding and barely looked at me. Brielle, in contrast, was everywhere. She had appointed herself unofficial maid of honor, even though my actual maid of honor was Janice. She had ordered her own dress in a champagne color, extremely close to mine, which I had quietly had Marlena address by ensuring photographers were briefed and the bridal party photo arrangements were locked. She kept calling herself the favorite sister in front of guests, like it was a charming joke. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I won't dwell on it because that part still belongs to me. Untouched, Theo cried during his vows. I didn't. I had been saving my tears for something I didn't know I was about to need them for. The reception started at 6. Cocktail hour. Then dinner. Then the planned toasts. Theo's father, Edmund, spoke first. And he was wonderful. He talked about meeting me, about the way I had quietly redirected an entire family Christmas dinner the year before by handling a power outage and a kitchen fire without anyone outside the kitchen even noticing. He said, "Vivian is the kind of person who fixes things while everyone else is still figuring out what's broken." The room applauded. My father, 3 tables away, did not. Dr. Lyles spoke second. Briefly, warmly, about watching me grow from a graduate student into the woman who now ran the department he had once chaired. Then Marlena, smooth as glass, signaled the band to begin transitioning to the first dance. That was when my father stood up. He had a champagne glass in his hand and a wireless microphone he had clearly taken from one of the staff during the speech transition. I would later learn that he had grabbed it during a brief gap when the audio tech had stepped away to adjust a connection. Marlena saw him stand and was already moving from her position near the door. But the room was wide, and he was fast in the way people are when they have rehearsed something. He tapped the microphone once. The room turned. He smiled the wide, comfortable smile of a man who had practiced being loved by audiences who didn't know him very well. "I just want to say a few words," he said. "About family." Theo's hand found mine under the table. He squeezed once. Just once. He knew. My father raised his glass. He looked at me first. Briefly. Then he turned his body, deliberately, toward the table where my mother and Brielle were sitting. Brielle already had her phone up. Already filming. Already smiling. He said, "To my real daughter, Brielle, who has been the joy of our lives since the day she was born." A few people clapped. Uncertain. He kept going. "And to the mistake we still feed." The pause he took after that sentence was the longest 2 seconds of my life. He smiled, like he was waiting for the applause line to land. And then it did. The table where my parents' friends were sitting laughed first. 8 people. Loud. Uncle Patrick, my mother's brother, Aunt Doreen, the Hendersons, who had known my parents for 30 years, the Callaways. Then it spread. Not the whole room. Maybe 40 people. Maybe 50. Enough to be unmistakable. Enough to confirm that this was not a single man's bad joke. This was a chorus of people who had been told for years that I was a punchline. And now they were finally allowed to laugh out loud about it. Brielle laughed the longest. She lowered her phone slightly to wipe her eye, then raised it again to keep filming. My mother smiled the whole time, one hand on my father's arm, the way she had smiled in every family photo of my entire childhood. Present and approving. Theo, beside me, had gone completely still. I felt him about to stand. I put my hand on his thigh, gently, and pressed once. He stayed seated. I had planned for this. I needed him to let me run the play. I looked across the ballroom. Marlena was already at the audio table. She was already nodding at the 2 security officers in dark suits, standing along the back wall. Her eyes met mine. I lifted my chin. Just slightly. One nod. She lifted her hand to her earpiece, said something I couldn't hear. And the music started. Not the first dance music. Different music. Soft. Neutral. Room music. Just loud enough to absorb the awkwardness and signal that the toast portion of the evening was over. The microphone in my father's hand cut out mid-laugh. He tapped it. Nothing. He laughed and said, "Well, I guess that's my cue," and sat down to scattered applause from his own table and silence from everyone else. Theo leaned over and whispered into my ear, "Whatever you need, I'm with you," I whispered back. "Just stay seated. Watch." He squeezed my hand again. The next 2 hours were the strangest of my life, because, on the surface, the wedding continued. The first dance happened. The cake was cut. People ate, drank, danced. But underneath, a quiet operation was unfolding that almost nobody in the room could see. Marlena moved between tables, like a woman taking dinner orders. She stopped at 4 specific tables. She spoke briefly to each guest at those tables. She pointed, twice, toward the back of the ballroom, where a small private side room had been set up earlier in the day, labeled, on its discreet sign, Family Lounge. The guests at those tables, including my parents and Brielle, they were politely informed by Marlena that the bride's family had requested a brief private gathering in the lounge for a special toast and presentation. My father, who had been drinking steadily since the ceremony, stood up immediately. So did my mother, Brielle, still riding the high of the toast, grabbed her phone in her clutch and followed. So did Uncle Patrick, Aunt Doreen, the Hendersons, and the Callaways. Every guest who had laughed loudest, they walked, smiling, through the ballroom and into the side room, expecting more of what they had already gotten. What they didn't see was that the side room had been prepared an hour earlier by Marlena's staff. The chairs were arranged in a half circle facing a single small table at the front. On that table was a sealed manila envelope and a folded piece of cardstock with my father's name on it. The door to the side room had a lock on the inside, and that lock had been quietly engaged from the hallway side by one of the security officers as the last guest entered. Once everyone was inside, Marlena entered through a separate side door, accompanied by both uniformed security officers and a third man in a charcoal suit I had also hired and never told anyone about. That third man was Daniel Ortiz. Daniel was an attorney with the firm that represented Theo's hospital network on labor matters, and I had retained him personally for one specific purpose. He carried a leather portfolio. He stepped to the front of the room, set the portfolio down, and said, calmly, "Good evening. My name is Daniel Ortiz. I am here on behalf of the bride. I am going to read a brief statement, and then I am going to deliver some documents. This will take approximately 6 minutes." My father started to laugh. He looked around for the joke. There wasn't one. Daniel opened the portfolio. He took out a sheet of paper. He read aloud. He stated that I, Vivian Hale, the bride and the contracting party for the wedding, had at 5:47 that evening invoked Tier 3 of my contract addendum with the wedding venue and the security firm following an unauthorized public toast that constituted, under the contract's defined terms, public humiliation of the bride. He stated that under that addendum, the guests responsible for the disruption, defined by their participation in the laughter and recording of the disruption, were to be removed from the wedding premises by uniformed security and presented with an itemized statement of associated costs. He stated that this statement was not a threat, not a lawsuit, and not a demand. It was a contractual notification. He paused. My father stood up. Daniel said, very politely, "Sir, please remain seated until I finish." My father did not sit. He pointed his finger and said, "This is my daughter's wedding." Daniel, without raising his voice, said, "Sir, this is the bride's wedding. The bride is in the ballroom. You are in this room because the bride invited you to be in this room. I am going to ask you one more time to remain seated." One of the security officers, a tall man with the calm posture of someone who used to do this job for a living and now did it for weddings, took a single step forward. My father sat down. Brielle had stopped smiling. She was staring at her phone. Pulling something up? I learned later that she had opened her own Instagram story, the one with the toast, and was watching the view count climb past 16,000. She had not yet realized that the toast was about to become the least important thing in her week. Daniel kept reading. He stated that an itemized invoice was being delivered to my father, as the named party who had initiated the disruption, in the amount of $14. 847. He stated that this amount represented the security firm's enforcement fee, a portion of the audiovisual reset fee charged by the venue, the wedding planner's contractual disruption management fee, and a portion of the photography and videography reshoot fees that had been triggered by the moment. He stated that this invoice was payable within 30 days. under the terms my father had implicitly accepted by attending an event governed by the venue's posted code of conduct, which had been printed on the back of the seating card at his place. Setting. My mother said. What seating card? Daniel slid an extra copy across the table. Small print. Polite phrasing. The words guests acknowledge and agree right at the top. She had not read it. None of them had. Most people don't. I had read it 3 times before signing the venue contract. Daniel then said, Additionally, the bride wishes to inform the named guests in this room of 3 personal decisions. Effective immediately. He listed them. Number 1. I would not be returning the $4, $200 my parents had been pretending was a loan I owed them. Because, after a careful audit of family transfers over the last 15 years that I had compiled with my husband and a forensic accountant, the actual flow of money was the other direction, by a margin of $61. Sanbei. He had a binner, with pages tabbed, prepared and waiting in the front office of the venue, available for my parents to review at their leisure, with a payment plan suggestion attached. Number 2. I was withdrawing my cosign from Brielle's apartment lease, effective at the end of the current lease term, which the leasing office had been notified of by certified mail 3 weeks earlier. Brielle would need to either qualify on her own income or find a new cosigner. This was not a punishment. It was a return to the version of her life she had told everyone she was old enough to live. Number 3. I was the personal representative of my late grandmother, Naomi Hale's estate. My grandmother had died 11 months before the wedding. Her will had been in probate. My father had been quietly telling relatives that Brielle was the named beneficiary of the cabin in the Smoky Mountains because she loved Grandma the most. That was not what the will said. The will named me as personal representative and named both granddaughters as equal beneficiaries of the cabin's eventual sale, with one specific condition that my grandmother had insisted on personally 3 weeks before she died. The cabin could not be sold to or occupied by my father under any circumstances. Daniel laid a copy of the relevant page of the will on the table. My father's name appeared in a paragraph titled, Disqualified Persons. My mother stared at the page like it was written in a foreign language. My father said, She wouldn't have. I had walked into the room by then. Quietly. Through the side door Daniel had used. I was still in my wedding dress. Theo was beside me. Marlena had stayed in the ballroom to keep the reception running. I said, Grandma told me on a Tuesday in February. She made me promise. I asked her if she was sure. She said, Vivian, your father has been waiting for me to die since I was 60. Don't let him have it. The room was silent. Brielle dropped her phone face down on her lap. I said, I didn't plan this for revenge. I planned this for protection. Marlena told me 6 months ago that some people only understand consequences when they come with a number. So tonight, here are your numbers. I looked at my father. He had aged 10 years since the toast. I said, You called me a mistake in front of 200 people. You did it on a microphone. You did it after I told Mom the program was set. That tells me you have spent my entire life believing there would never be a consequence for treating me this way. You were right for 31 years. You are wrong tonight. He opened his mouth. I said, I'm not done. He closed it. I said, You and Mom and Brielle are going to be escorted out by security in a few minutes. You're going to receive your invoice at the front desk. Whether you pay it is your decision. The other documents I mentioned are not negotiable. The estate decisions are not personal. They were my grandmother's. The financial audit is not personal. It is just math. The lease decision is not personal. It is just paperwork. None of this is anger. All of it is paperwork. I have been politely refusing to file for my entire adult life. My mother started crying. I had seen her cry many times. She used it the way some people use exclamation points. I said, "Mom, I love you. I have loved you my whole life. But I am done being the daughter who absorbs whatever you and Dad need her to absorb so that Brielle can keep being the daughter you wanted." Brielle finally spoke. She said, "Vivian, this is insane. It was a joke." I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "Brielle, you filmed it. You captioned it. Dad said what we were all thinking. I can read?" She turned bright red. She had not realized I had seen the post. Janice had screenshotted it for me 23 minutes after she posted it. It was already on a server with a timestamp. Daniel said, gently, "We should proceed with the escort." Security stepped forward. My father stood, finally, and tried one more thing. He said, "Vivian, please, people are going to ask questions." I said, "Yes, they are, and I am going to answer them honestly. That is the part you should have planned for." Security walked all 12 guests out. Not just my parents and Brielle, the Hendersons, the Callaways, Uncle Patrick, Aunt Doreen, and 4 others, all of whom had laughed loudest, had been removed from the guest list under the same Tier 3 protocol because Marlena's photographer had captured high-resolution images of every laughing face during the toast, and the security firm had used those images to identify each guest. They were walked, in a single quiet line, through a side hallway that had been deliberately routed away from the main ballroom to spare them, and to spare the rest of my guests. The spectacle. At the front desk. Each of them received an envelope. My father's contained the invoice. The Hendersons contained a smaller invoice. So did the Callaways. The amounts had been calculated proportionally, based on each guest's documented role in the disruption. My father, as the initiator, received the largest. My mother, who had not actively participated in the laughter on camera, received no invoice, just a letter. I had written the letter myself. I will not share what it said. That part is between her and me. I walked back into the ballroom with Theo. The band shifted. Our first dance, which we had delayed by exactly 23 minutes for logistical reasons that nobody in the room had questioned, began. We danced. People watched. People who had not laughed. People who had been horrified by the toast and unsure what to do. People who, I would later learn, had been secretly relieved when my father stopped being in the room. After the dance, my father-in-law Edmund came to me and put a hand on my shoulder and said, very quietly, "I have been waiting 40 years to see something like that handled with that much grace." I started crying then. Just for a moment. Theo wiped my face with his thumb and said, "Now you can cry." The rest of the night was, against all odds, beautiful. We danced until midnight. The cake was actually delicious. Janice gave a maid of honor speech that made me laugh until my ribs hurt. Theo's grandmother, who is 86, came up to me at one point, took both my hands, and said, "Sweetheart, your grandmother would be so proud. I knew Naomi for 30 years. She told me about you. I had not known they had met more than once." The first message from my mother came at 6:14 the next morning. It was a long, single-paragraph text accusing me of humiliating the family, ruining my own wedding, and embarrassing my father in front of his friends. There were 47 of those messages over the next 3 weeks. I read them. I did not respond. By week 2, the tone shifted. The accusations softened. The pleading began. By week 4, the negotiations started. Could she come over for coffee? Could we just talk? Could I please call your father? Who is not sleeping. By month 2, my father called Theo's office, looking for a softer entry point. Theo, calmly, in the voice he uses with hostile witnesses in deposition, told him, Sir, Vivian will reach out when and if she chooses to. Calling me is not a path. My father called once more. Theo did not pick up. He never called again. Brielle's apartment lease ended 4 months after the wedding. Her income did not qualify her on her own. She moved back in with my parents. My mother told a relative that this was temporary, just until things settle. That was almost 2 years ago. They are still settling. The cabin in the Smoky Mountains was sold the following spring. Brielle and I split the proceeds equally. As my grandmother had specified, the transaction was handled through the estate attorney. I never spoke to Brielle directly. The check was simply deposited. My father, I learned later, had hired a lawyer to challenge the will. The lawyer, after reviewing the file, declined to take the case. The disqualification clause my grandmother had included was airtight, witnessed, notarized, and accompanied by a private letter she had written, explaining her reasoning. The lawyer told my father, in the kind of polite language lawyers use when they want to make sure they don't get sued for malpractice, that pursuing the matter would be neither financially advisable nor likely to succeed. My father paid the invoice from the wedding. It took him nearly the full 30 days. He paid it from his own checking account, which my mother had. Until that point, not realized was nearly empty. That discovery, I am told, led to a long and difficult conversation between them about money. I had never been allowed to ask questions about. My mother is now working part-time at a real estate office to help cover their bills. The Hendersons paid their invoice. The Callaways paid theirs. Uncle Patrick wrote me a letter, mailed, on actual paper, apologizing. He paid his invoice and asked if there was a path back to a relationship. I wrote him back. I said yes. Eventually. But not yet. And not until you understand exactly why I sent the invoice in the first place. We exchanged 3 more letters. He understood. We have coffee. Now. Every other month. He is the only member of my extended family I see regularly. He told me, the second time we had coffee, that he had laughed at the toast because he had been laughing at my father's jokes about me for 25 years and had never once stopped to think about what those jokes were actually saying. He said, I'm 63 years old. Vive. And I needed an invoice to make me hear what I had been agreeing to my whole life. I told him I understood. I told him most people need a number. People keep asking me whether I regret it, whether it was too harsh, whether it ruined my wedding. The honest answer is that my wedding was not ruined. My wedding was rescued. The version of that day where I sat there and absorbed his toast, smiled, kept the peace, and let 200 people walk out into the parking lot believing my father's framing of me. That wedding would have ruined the next 10 years of my marriage. I would have spent every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday rebuilding myself in private after each visit, while Theo watched and slowly understood that the woman he had married was being eroded in real time by the people who claimed to love her. Instead, what happened was this. I told the truth. In writing. With security. With paperwork. With a number attached. In front of the people who had spent decades laughing at me. I did not yell. I did not curse. I did not throw a drink. I did the one thing my family had spent 31 years teaching me I was not allowed to do. I made it expensive to treat me badly. And once it became expensive, almost everyone stopped. Theo and I have been married almost 2 years now. We bought a small house outside the city the spring after the wedding. We have a dog named Beans. My career has continued to rise. I was promoted to Vice President of Revenue Integrity at my hospital network 6 months after the wedding. My grandmother's cabin was sold to a young couple with 2 kids who, according to the realtor, cried when they saw the kitchen because it reminded them of one of their own grandmothers. I think Naomi would have liked them. My father has not spoken to me in 14 months. I am told, through Uncle Patrick, that he says he is waiting for me to apologize. I am not going to. My mother sends a card on every holiday. They say things like, "We miss you. We love you. Please come home." I read each one. I do not throw them away. I keep them in a drawer. Maybe one day I will write back. Maybe I won't. Brielle messaged me 3 months ago. She said, "I deleted the post a long time ago. I'm sorry I filmed it. I was drunk. I was jealous. I was raised to compete with you. And I never knew that's what was happening until I had to live in our parents' house again as an adult, and finally heard them talk about you when they thought I wasn't listening. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to know that I see it now." I wrote back. I said, "I see that you see it. That's a start. Let's talk in a year." She wrote back, "Okay, that's where we are." She and I exchange short messages every few weeks. Nothing heavy. The clock is running. We will see. The wedding video, the official one shot by my contracted videographer, edited beautifully into a 14-minute film, does not include the toast. By contract, the videographer was instructed to omit any unauthorized speech and to capture only the planned program. What it does include is the moment Theo whispered to me, the moment I nodded at Marlena, the moment the music shifted, the moment Edmund put his hand on my shoulder later that night, the moment Theo's grandmother held my hands. It is a film about a wedding that, on the surface, looked like every other beautiful wedding, but I know what it actually is. It's the film of a woman finally being believed by her own life. So if you have ever sat at a table where the people who were supposed to celebrate you used the moment to diminish you instead, and if you have ever wondered whether a quiet, paperwork-shaped kind of consequence is enough, I want to tell you something I had to learn the hard way. You do not have to scream to be heard. You do not have to ruin them to refuse them. You just have to stop paying for the seat they have been making you cover for 31 years. And then, when they finally see the bill, you have to be willing to let them sit with it. So tell me honestly, if your own father stood up at your wedding, in front of 200 people, and called you the mistake the family still feeds, would you have nodded politely and let the night continue? Or would you have nodded at the one person in the room who was finally on your side, and let the consequences arrive on schedule?